Next week, I'll be moving back to my parents' place.
My eldest son suddenly blurted out during our video call. I widened my eyes in surprise and replied, "Moving back here, even if you say that." But before I could finish my sentence, my son's wife appeared on the video call screen and interrupted me, saying,
"You'll be able to live with your grandchild. You're so happy."
Upon hearing this, my grandchild, who had just started kindergarten, loudly asked,
"Can I play with Grandma Monster a lot?"
In response, my son's wife smiled and said,
"Of course, you can play a lot. And I'll have your mom help with the housework, so I can relax too."
She eagerly threw the playful child at me, seemingly excited about the prospect of bossing me around once we live together. But things won't be that simple.
Alright, get ready and wait for me.
My son said, cutting the call without waiting for my response. As he always does, he only sees and hears what's convenient for him. That's why I'll be facing quite a challenge this time. Good morning, I'm Barbara. Last year, my husband passed away, and my children had already grown up and gotten married. So I ended up living alone in my family's house. Even when my husband was alive, my daughter Linda and my son David used to visit frequently, but we rarely had direct interactions. Linda had some reservations about David, and I guess it was because of their differences. Linda is more serious. In contrast, David is laid back and has a sense of humor, but sometimes he avoids facing reality. Their differences in personality often led to clashes, even during our middle school and high school days. Even when it came to summer homework, they had different views.
"Mom, I finished my summer homework. I'm free to enjoy the rest of the summer."
Mom, just so you know, there's still more to study during the summer break. It wouldn't make sense to rush through it.
Those words made David visibly annoyed. He retorted with a hint of frustration,
"Don't blame me for doing my homework. You know, Linda, you're not exactly the quickest when it comes to solving problems. I guess it's tough for you to be as fast as me."
Linda, instead of getting angry, couldn't help but be amused. She replied,
Coming from someone who did their homework with the answers right in front of them, your argument lacks credibility, David. If you're doing your homework in the living room, at least try to stop copying the answers.
David's face turned crimson. Perhaps realizing he had been caught, he chose to remain silent, not engaging with Linda any further. David had always had a tendency to take shortcuts like this. While he had learned his lesson about cheating during his elementary school days, and hadn't cheated on tests since then, it was common for him to ask his friends for help when he hadn't done his homework. In contrast, Linda was a diligent student. Although she wasn't the quickest learner and lacked the knack for efficiency, she was the type to ask for help whenever she didn't understand something in her studies. This approach earned her a good reputation with teachers and consistently high test scores. She was also actively involved in extracurricular activities like the student council and volunteer work, which even led to her receiving college recommendations. Linda remarked,
"I want to learn as much as I can once I get into college."
In contrast, David seemed to think that going to college was about making new friends and having fun, often putting studying on the back burner. He spent a lot of time hanging out with friends, taking up part-time jobs, and wasn't home much. Both Linda and David managed to graduate from college. Somehow, Linda landed a job at the foreign multinational company she had been wanting to work for, while David, after trying out a few seemingly good companies, ended up joining the only one that hired him. 3 years later, David brought a certain woman home. Her name was Emily. They had met and started dating at the company where David was employed. Emily was of the same age as David, but she still felt like a student in the working world.
"I'm Emily. Nice to meet you, Mom, Dad,"
she said with such politeness. How many parents out there would welcome such politeness without a hint of suspicion? Probably not many, I would guess. My husband and I exchanged surprised glances as we couldn't believe that a woman like her would be marrying our son. But to our even greater astonishment, David, our son, didn't seem to find anything strange about her behavior. In fact, he turned to us and said,
Please don't bully my wife.
Upon hearing those words, my husband and I finally realized that David was wholeheartedly committed to marrying Emily. We were left dumbfounded, scratching our heads in disbelief after Emily had left. But then, David dropped an even more unbelievable bombshell.
Linda, my sister, she probably still hasn't found anyone to date. She used to look down on me so much, thinking she'd get married and have kids before me. But I guess no one would want to be with a woman like her.
David chuckled heartily. David likely harbored some strange sense of competition with his sister for a long time, and now, with the news of his upcoming marriage, he could relish in his newfound sense of superiority. However, things took an unexpected turn when Linda arrived at our place. After hearing from us that David was bringing a woman home, David, brimming with confidence about his upcoming marriage, took the opportunity to start mocking his sister, saying,
She's such a late bloomer, and she's too tomboyish and overbearing.
Emily and I overheard this as we stood behind David, and it wasn't pleasant. Did David finally realize the disapproving looks we were giving him after mocking his sister for a while? He turned around slowly, and behind him was Linda, wearing an angry expression that could rival a demon's. It's needless to say that David screamed. I mean, he had been making a complete fool of his own sister. After that, it's safe to assume that he received quite a scolding from his heroic sister, and anyone could imagine that, with exchanges like these, the rift between Linda, the elder sister, and David, the younger brother, grew deeper than it had ever been during their student years. Even if they were both adults now, forcing them to get along seemed like a futile effort. Nevertheless, despite the growing rift, David had invited Linda to his wedding. I suppose, as long as they had some common sense, it wouldn't be a big deal if they didn't get along. But the fact remained that both of them preferred to keep their distance from each other in their private lives. Is it that David prefers to avoid talking to his sister, who always confronts him with harsh reality, and doesn't accept anything but convenient facts more than anything else? There used to be no visits from her when she was staying at our house. Nevertheless, the one who arrives without any concern is David's wife, Emily. She has given birth to their child, Ethan. Frequently, when I'm here, she comes over with their grandson and says,
Take a look at this child. Doesn't he resemble David a lot? With him, this family finally has an heir, right? Didn't you ever think a son would secure this family from the beginning? The firstborn is always the best, the firstborn.
She looks at Linda, who is her husband's sister, and tries to appeal to us with the son she gave birth to. Perhaps Emily has been influenced at home by complaints about Linda from her husband David, causing her to sympathize with David's feelings and dislike Linda. However, being told such things, Linda is not the kind of person who gets hurt by that. Speaking with a somewhat exasperated tone, Linda said,
You can be so circuitous, you know? Can't you just get to the point? Your roundabout way of talking doesn't work with me or our parents, considering you're not very good at it. Only about 20% of what you want to say actually gets across.
Hearing this, Emily's face turned crimson as she retorted,
What's your problem? Seriously? Making fun of me for trying not to hurt anyone's feelings? Maybe that's why you're still single at your age, you backward woman.
With her child in tow, Emily stormed out, her words still echoing in the room. Linda couldn't help but find it amusing. Soon after this heated exchange, Linda surprised us by expressing her desire to introduce her boyfriend. It turns out they had been dating for 3 years, but her boyfriend, who worked in the international business department, had been postponing marriage due to his overseas assignments. David and Emily had often teased her, saying she couldn't find a boyfriend, all the while not knowing anything about her relationship. It was only when Emily revealed her plans for an overseas wedding that David and Emily were left utterly speechless, their mouths agape in astonishment. All along, we had a mistaken belief that we could always one-up each other, but it seems like that was a complete misjudgment, freezing our minds in its tracks. Though we attended the wedding, neither David nor Emily had any hint of a smile on their faces, and that left a lasting impression. Somewhere down the line, Emily decided to take her child for an overseas vacation, and as time went by with the arrival of their child, David and Emily's marital bond started losing its common ground. It's almost as if they believe that having a small child is an excuse to get away with treating others poorly. It was after my husband's sudden demise that I truly began to feel it. It was during one of those times when David had mentioned going on a business trip, leaving only Emily and her grandson at our place. Emily arrived at our home, her child in tow, and said,
Could you please take care of our little one? You know, Grandma, can you recall what I told you at home?
Granny, I'll beat the monster.
They exchanged words in front of the house, and it was understood that it was only natural for me to take care of the child. In my grandson's hand, there was a toy that resembled a sword, making the same sound as those popular in kids' anime shows. The moment he stepped into the hallway, he swung the toy sword at my feet. I exclaimed, "Ouch!" But my daughter-in-law, Emily, dismissed it with a casual,
You're making a big deal out of it. Be glad that he's playing with you.
Without stopping her child's unruly behavior, she promptly left on her own. As a result, I found myself tasked with looking after my grandson, Ethan. He continued to target me with his toy sword, and bruises began to form on my legs. When I shared this with my son David, who was away on a business trip, he responded,
Mom, you need to be careful. Even though you enjoy playing with Ethan, don't overexert yourself. If you were to have an accident or something, it would fall on Emily to take care of you. Try not to inconvenience us.
David seemed to think that I had consulted him because Emily, Ethan, and I were getting along so well. Perhaps he had created a convenient image in his mind of us all having a harmonious relationship. When I talked to Linda about this,
David and Emily really need to shape up. It's about their mother, you know. I can't stand how they can't even discipline their own children. I've been wanting to say this for a while, but Mom, let's live together. They think they can do whatever they want at home just because there's no strict dad like mine. So, I think if I live with you, they won't misbehave anymore.
I told her, that sounds like a good idea. Speaking of my marriage to Linda, truth be told, her husband often travels around the world to inspect our company's branches, so he's not the kind of person who stays home for long. Because of that, it seems he often worried whether Linda would be lonely when he wasn't around. So, when she suggested that Linda and her husband would live together with me, he gladly accepted. I felt it would be unfair for them to bear the entire cost of the house, since I had my husband's inheritance to rely on. So I told them that I would cover the expenses. After discussing it with Linda and her husband, we decided to purchase a house together. About a month after the three of us, Linda, her husband, and I, started living together in the new house, David called us through a video call.
Mom, can't you being cold-hearted? If you bought a house, you should have at least let me know.
He complained. I remained silent to prevent David's family from interfering further. And even Linda did not deliberately talk to David about her situation. It seems David only found out about the detached house a month after we moved. How come it's necessary to tell David first? I conveyed my genuine question, and David laughed.
Don't say things like that. I'm the eldest son, so it's only natural. Anyway, if that's the case, both Emily and I agree, so we're planning to move back to the family home next week.
During a video call conversation, David suddenly brought that up, moving back to his parents' home. Well, I mean, although it might be referred to as his parents' home, since the house where Linda and I live now was built on the land where my original house stood, it might not be wrong to call it his parents' home. However, regardless, this house is already where Linda, her husband, and I live. If he think David, Emily, and their child can live here, that's a big mistake. I widened my eyes and said, moving here, even if you say that, it's not possible. But Emily appeared on the video call screen. interrupting my words.
It's great to be able to live with my grandchild, isn't it?
It was my grandson, Ethan, who had just started attending kindergarten, and he gleefully exclaimed,
Grandma, I can play with so many toys.
I could almost picture him holding that toy sword, the same one that had accidentally bruised my leg a while back. My daughter-in-law, Emily, responded with a warm smile.
That's right, Ethan. Enjoy playing with Grandma. It also gives me a chance to relax a bit and get some help with household chores.
She seemed genuinely happy to have the energetic child spend time with me, her mother-in-law. Even though she conveniently overlooked the bruise on my leg, she probably thought that if we lived together, she could take advantage of me. But it wouldn't come to that, as David, my son, said,
All right then, get ready and wait for me.
And abruptly ended the video call without waiting for my response. I couldn't help but sigh. David always tends to see and hear only what is convenient for him, never really paying attention to the other side of things. This self-serving attitude undoubtedly led to the trouble he's facing now. When I shared this whole video call situation with Linda, she was genuinely astonished.
Next week? Well, my husband and I will be home, so that's fine.
She assured me.
But please, if you're the only one at home when David and Emily come, don't open the door.
She insisted firmly. Then, seemingly struck with a brilliant idea, she suggested,
You know what, Mom? Why don't you go on a hot spring trip until this all blows over?
Suddenly, Linda's face lit up with what seemed like a stroke of inspiration, and she, along with her husband, planned a hot spring trip for me, partly to show appreciation for my efforts. I initially resisted, saying, "Oh, that's too much," but they insisted it was a token of gratitude for handling household chores in their busy stead, and they kindly arranged the trip for me on a beautiful seaside hot spring resort. I was enjoying a 2-night, 3-day vacation. I indulged in the fresh bounty of the sea. And in the morning, at the lavish buffet of the inn, I heaped salmon roe generously on top of my rice, starting my day in bliss. The warm light of the morning sun streaming through the window bathed us in a sense of contentment. On the second day, I strolled along a scenic hiking trail, my breath quickening but my heart stolen by the breathtaking views I encountered. As I took breaks amidst the natural splendor, feeling rejuvenated, my phone unexpectedly rang. Answering the unexpected call, I found it was from my son, David. Over the phone, he began explaining in a rushed tone that something chaotic had unfolded back home.
Mom, why are Linda and her husband at our house?
David's voice was laden with pain born from years of friction. Since childhood, he had a strained relationship with his sister, Linda, and his words sounded almost like a cry of agony. To him, his sister was an entity of fear. Then, I could hear the voice of Emily, my daughter-in-law, over the phone.
Why won't they let us into the house? Can't we live here?
Her voice was a mix of anger and confusion. Sighing, I asked David, "Why don't you ask Linda, who's right there with you?" His response, almost tearful, was,
That's just it. I'm scared to talk to her. There's no way I can ask my sister any questions. She always says harsh things.
"Well, that's because David never really listens to what others say and only hears what he wants to hear. I'm just trying to show him the reality of the situation. But it seems like he really dislikes that. But David, he is a parent now. It won't cut it to just listen to what suits you anymore. David have a responsibility as a father." "Well, let me explain. I'm living with Linda and her husband."
Oh, why? I'm the eldest, you know.
"Actually, I thought you assumed I would live with you all just because you're the eldest. You see, David, times have changed. It's not just about birth order anymore. It's about practicality and the willingness to take care of one another."
Well, I am the eldest and I have kids.
"I understand that, but living with David, Emily, and their child feels like a daunting prospect for me. I doubt David or Emily would take care of me, even if I fell ill. Times have changed, David, and we need to adapt to the new reality. I really can't stand all of you, so living together is completely out of the question." I don't want to share a home, even if you were to beg me to. Honestly, he always twisted my words, only picking up on what suited him best. But this time, I wanted to be crystal clear, making sure he understood every word. David, on the other end of the phone, seemed more taken aback than I had expected.
What?
Moreover, even though I paid for the construction of that house, I put it under Linda's name. So, even if you try to ingratiate yourself with me and kick Linda and her husband out, it won't work.
You've got to be kidding. We thought we could live here and even moved out of the apartment. Now we're going to be evicted with nowhere to go.
Evicted? This was news to me. As I inquired further, David began to explain. It turns out that David had never been involved in raising his own child, so he had no idea how his child behaved in his absence. However, one day, the landlord had something to say about it.
Enough with the noise and mischief in the apartment.
They had forcibly entered other residents' rooms, wielding toy swords and defacing the exterior walls with crayon drawings. It was a chaotic situation. Despite my numerous complaints to Emily, she never seemed to discipline the children. The situation escalated to the point where our landlord had to step in with a final warning, but even that didn't lead to any improvement. However, I wanted to make it clear that neither I or Linda had any responsibility for this mess. It's your family's own fault, I told David and Emily sternly. We have nothing to do with it. I hoped they would understand that we couldn't continue to tolerate their behavior.
We're family. Help us out.
David pleaded desperately. I took a deep breath, realizing that it was time to draw a line. Then let's cut ties, I responded firmly.
Cut ties?
David sounded surprised. Yes, I replied with conviction. I'd rather not have anything to do with you anymore. You should understand that by now. As David began to grasp the extent of his mother's disapproval, he started sobbing on the other end of the phone. It was a painful moment, but I knew it was necessary. I hung up, feeling a mix of emotions. He didn't call me again that day, and I continued my elegant trip. I found a charming log cabin-style cafe on the hiking trail, where I took a relaxing break before returning to the Ryokan. As I returned home from my trip, I found that everything had returned to the usual daily routine for both Linda and her husband. It seems that Emily had been quite insistent about wanting to live here. But David, not particularly fond of Linda, and realizing that I also held no affection for her, returned home with a sense of disappointment. Subsequently, it appears that David and Emily managed to move into the company housing provided by the company they both work for. However, their child's behavior and discipline continue to be a concern. Emily seems to be scolded daily by the other moms in the company housing, as everyone there holds higher positions or are the wives of those in higher positions compared to Emily and David. It seems Emily can do nothing more than offer apologies in that setting. Their child, on the other hand, has had their toy sword taken away, which they used to wield as a weapon in the past. They cry every day as a result. However, their bullying behavior has caused them trouble even in kindergarten, where they struggle to make friends and face admonishment from the adults around them. It's a hopeful sign that they are gradually becoming more well-behaved, and I hope that by the time they enter elementary school, they will have learned to consider the feelings of others. Well, regardless of what the future holds, I have no plans to meet David's family. I'll continue to live harmoniously with Linda and her husband, just as we do every day.